What is a seemingly cheap hobby that quickly becomes very expensive to continue doing? Story 1. I started woodworking because I figured, why buy something when I can make it myself for 3 times the cost? I picked up a hand-me-down miter saw, some cheap pine boards, and went to town. Before I knew it, I was $2,000 deep into tools and clamps I didn't even know existed. Turns out it takes more than a weekend to build a decent coffee table, and I had to convince myself that I'd save money on future projects. Spoiler, I didn't. But hey, now I can build a subpar shelf in only 6 months. Story 2. I wanted to save money by setting up a home server with a spare computer. Seemed harmless enough. Then I got a used server for $200, but it sucked power like a hungry toddler with a juice box, so I upgraded to a $3,000 energy-efficient model. Of course, that much power called for virtual machines, Plex, and a ridiculous amount of storage. I needed a faster internet plan, and my electric bill ballooned. I finally realized my savings had vanished when I spent $350 last month just to keep my server running. Story 3. Fishing seemed like a cheap hobby. $30 rod, some worms, and a peaceful day by the water. Then it happened. I bought a better rod, a kayak, electronics, and spent hours organizing lures in overpriced plastic boxes. Meanwhile, some kid with a cartoon-themed toy rod pulled a trophy trout out of the same lake where I couldn't catch a cold. Now I just sit in my $1,000 kayak, questioning how it all spiraled so far out of control. Story 4. A buddy of mine introduced me to Magic, the Gathering. The cards aren't that expensive, I thought. Fast forward 2 months, and I'm $700 deep into booster packs and rare cards, chasing that perfect deck. Every time I think I'm done spending, they release a deluxe set or some exclusive promo I just have to get. I swear I could have paid rent twice with what I've dumped into this cardboard money pit. Story 5. I decided to try gardening to save money on vegetables. A few pots, some seeds, and dirt. How hard could it be? Hundreds of dollars later, I'm standing over 20 cherry tomatoes and a single pathetic bell pepper, wondering why I didn't just go to the grocery store. My wife says, "We just need better soil," but I know deep down that next year's crop will probably cost just as much. Story 6. I picked up cycling because it seemed healthy and budget-friendly. A bike and helmet were all I needed, at first. Then I upgraded to clipless pedals, fancy shoes, and a bike computer. Next came better clothing, new helmets, and sunglasses to match the outfit themes. Eventually, I bought a bike that cost more than my first car. Now I've got a garage full of gear, take bike-specific vacations, and still catch myself browsing for the next upgrade. I keep telling myself it's worth it because it's good exercise, right? Story 7. It started with one 3D printer and a couple of spools of filament, just for small projects. Within a year, I had 5 printers, a rainbow of filament colors, and shelves full of half-finished doodads collecting dust. I've printed cool stuff, life-sized skulls, dice towers, you name it. But somehow I've spent thousands on gadgets and shimmering burgundy filament that I swear I'll use one day. My house looks like a nerdy mini-factory, and I still think about buying another printer. Story 8. Surfing was simple when I was a kid. One board, a little wax, and I walked to the beach. But once I had a job, the addiction grew. Trips to Hawaii and Mexico for waves led to a bigger quiver of boards, wetsuits, and plane tickets. Then came the surf camps, travel costs, and a mortgage near the coast for better access. My wife, who doesn't surf anymore, just rolls her eyes every time I load the kids' boards for a family surf trip. I tell myself I'm chasing that perfect wave, but maybe I'm just chasing 13-year-old me. Story 9. When I started snowboarding, it was all about borrowing gear and hitting local slopes. Then I bought my own setup, started chasing powder days, and planned entire vacations around storms. Flights, hotels, lift passes, it all adds up. And let's not forget the extra boards, boots, and jackets for every condition. Now I'm that person with a weather app obsession and a gear bag the size of a small car. I can't decide if it's the thrill of the ride or the memories of my best runs that keep me going, but my wallet begs me to stop. Story 10. I figured fish keeping would be relaxing. I started with one tank, some cheap fish, and a little filter. Soon I wanted a bigger tank. Then I wanted a reef tank. Before I knew it, I had over $10,000 in equipment, including a setup that mimics ocean waves and tracks the moon cycle. My power bill spiked, but at least my fish were thriving. Or so I thought. When one died, I spent hours diagnosing what went wrong and spent even more fixing it. Now I'm basically running an aquarium business in my living room. Story 11. Knitting seemed innocent enough, just some needles and yarn to pass the time. Then I discovered how many colors, textures, and patterns existed. One ball of yarn turned into a collection that could rival a craft store, and now I have enough to knit sweaters for an entire village. I also realized that knitting and yarn collecting are two separate hobbies because I spend more time shopping for materials than actually using them. My stash has its own closet, and I keep telling myself I'll knit through it someday. Spoiler, I won't. Story 12. Film photography hooked me with a thrift store camera and a cheap roll of film. I thought it'd be a fun, retro hobby. Then I learned about lenses, darkroom equipment, and all the fancy films that capture light differently. My cheap camera turned into a collection of vintage ones, and I started developing prints in my laundry room. I stopped adding up the costs when I realized my nostalgic photos were worth more than my smartphone. Every shot is an expensive gamble, but it's hard to quit when the results are just so satisfying. Story 13. Gardening sounded like the perfect way to save money on fresh produce. I imagined a backyard bursting with fruits and veggies, all grown for pennies. Reality check. Soil, fertilizer, pots, and tools quickly ran up the bill. After months of effort, I harvested a grand total of 20 tomatoes and a single carrot that looked like it needed therapy. My wife says it's a labor of love, but I think I could have saved hundreds by hitting up the farmer's market instead. Story 14. I started drinking whiskey because it felt classy, just a nice bourbon here and there. But then I wanted to try scotches, ryes, and all the bougie bottles I could find. My cabinet is now a shrine to whiskey, filled with bottles too precious to drink because I don't want to pay to replace them. Somehow, I've spent hundreds on a collection I barely touch, convincing myself it's an investment. Meanwhile, my friends drink Jack and Coke, and I'm over here debating tasting notes like I'm running a distillery. Story 15. Lego seemed like a wholesome hobby. I bought a small set for nostalgia, thinking it'd be a one-time thing. Then I saw a collector's edition set and just had to have it. Fast forward 6 months, and I've got shelves filled with intricate builds, from the Millennium Falcon to a full Hogwarts. Each new set is pricier than the last, and I'm somehow justifying it all because they're investments. I might have gone overboard when I built a custom display case for my bricks, made with my own expensive woodworking tools, of course. Story 16. Cycling seemed simple at first, just a bike and a helmet. But then I discovered clipless pedals, fancy shoes, and bike computers. I upgraded to better gear, matching outfits, and eventually a carbon fiber bike that cost more than my couch. I started planning weekend trips and even vacations around bike routes. Now my garage looks like a pro shop, and I have an indoor trainer for winter riding. Every time I think I'm done spending, I find something else I need. It's like the bikes multiply when I'm not looking. Story 17. Crochet was supposed to be a budget-friendly hobby, just a hook and some yarn, right? Well, I got a little too into the yarn. I now have bins filled with skeins in every color and texture imaginable, and most of them are untouched. I tell myself I'll use them someday, but I've moved on to at least 5 other hobbies since. It turns out collecting yarn is a hobby in itself, and I'm not sure I even like crocheting that much anymore. My closet disagrees. Story 18. Board games seemed like a fun way to bond with friends. I started with a few classic games, but then I discovered deluxe editions, expansions, and Kickstarter exclusives. Before I knew it, my collection was worth thousands, and I was losing sleep over whether I should buy a limited pre-order. FOMO is real, and now I have stacks of games we barely play because setup takes forever. Every new game promises to be the best yet, but I think the real game is how much money I can spend. Story 19. Fish keeping started with one small tank. I thought it'd be relaxing to watch a few fish swim around. Then I wanted a bigger tank, then another for different species, and then a saltwater tank for corals. I got so into it that I started designing a centralized filtration system to manage them all. My equipment costs hit 5 figures, and I barely notice the fish anymore. But hey, my tank mimics ocean waves with lunar accuracy, and I only have to clean the glass. Totally worth it, right? Story 20. Magic. The gathering seemed affordable at first. I bought a deck and a few booster packs, thinking it'd be a casual pastime. 2 months later, I've spent hundreds on rare cards, sleeves, and limited editions. Every set release sucks me in, and I've started attending tournaments where people talk about their decks like stock portfolios. I used to think Monopoly was expensive because of family fights, but Magic has shown me a whole new level of financial pain. Story 21. I thought snowboarding would be a one-time purchase. A board, some boots, and a lift ticket. Simple. Then I discovered the obsession with chasing powder days. Every season I spend hundreds on gear upgrades, new boards for different conditions, and travel to find the perfect snow. I've planned entire vacations around storm forecasts, only to get skunked by bad weather. Now my garage is packed with snowboards, my closet stuffed with jackets, and my bank account lighter than the powder I'm always chasing. But hey, that one perfect run makes it all worth it. Story 22. When I got into car mods, I figured I'd keep it simple. Maybe just tint the windows and upgrade the sound system. Then I wanted new wheels, a better suspension, and a custom exhaust. One project led to another, and now my car is a full-blown money pit. Every time I think I'm finished, I spot a new must-have upgrade online, and the cycle starts all over. At this point, I've spent so much that my car should be in a Fast and Furious movie, but it mostly sits in the driveway because I'm too nervous to scratch it. Story 23. Gardening was supposed to save me money on produce. I pictured a lush backyard filled with fresh fruits and veggies. Instead, I spent a fortune on soil, planters, fertilizers, and tools. After months of watering and weeding, I ended up with a handful of sad tomatoes and a single pitiful zucchini. My neighbor says I need to invest in better compost, but I'm starting to think I should just invest in a farmer's market membership instead. At least their tomatoes don't cost $50 each. Story 24. 3D printing sounded cheap. I got an affordable printer and some filament, figuring I'd use it for small projects. A year later, I have multiple printers, shelves full of spools in every color, and a house cluttered with random gadgets I've printed. I've made some useful stuff, sure, but most of it ends up collecting dust. I even printed a life-sized skull in shimmering burgundy because why not? Now, every new filament color feels like a necessity, and I'm eyeing another printer upgrade. My wallet and my wife are both over it. Story 25. Fishing seemed like a no-brainer for a relaxing, low-cost hobby. I started with a simple $40 rod and a pack of worms. But then I wanted a kayak, better gear, and fancy lures that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I've spent hours at the lake, watching kids with cartoon-themed rods catch fish while I go home empty-handed. My garage is now a shrine to expensive fishing gear I barely use, and every trip ends with me questioning why the fish hate me so much. Story 26. Running was supposed to be cheap, just a pair of shoes and some gym clothes, right? Then I learned about specialized shoes for every type of run, high-tech clothing, and fancy GPS watches. I started buying gels, hydration vests, and paying for race entries that cost more than concert tickets. Add in travel and hotel stays for out-of-town races, and suddenly this cheap hobby is eating half my paycheck. I might be faster, but my wallet is running on fumes. Story 27. I got into fountain pens because they seemed elegant and timeless. I started with one $50 pen and a bottle of ink, but then I wanted different nib sizes, colors, and limited editions. Before I knew it, I had a drawer full of pens, a rainbow of ink bottles, and notebooks so expensive I'm afraid to write in them. I've spent hours obsessing over the perfect pen and paper combo, and now my handwriting is fancy, but my bank account looks like chicken scratch. Story 28. Surfing began as a simple love, just one board, some wax, and a walk to the beach. Then came the travel to better breaks, plane tickets to tropical destinations, and more boards for different wave types. I started buying wetsuits for every season and debating whether I needed a board bag with wheels. My wife thinks I've lost it because I'm teaching our kids to surf just to justify more gear. All I wanted was a good wave, but now I'm riding the tide of debt instead. Story 29. Board gaming sounded harmless, but every new release sucked me in. Deluxe editions, expansions, and Kickstarter exclusives piled up until my shelf space ran out. My friends joke that I have a library of games, but I keep buying more because this one's different. Meanwhile, half my collection hasn't even been played, and I keep pretending the next purchase will be my last. Let's be honest, it never is. Story 30. Fish keeping started as a cute idea, a small tank and a couple of goldfish. Then I wanted more. Exotic fish, custom tanks, and elaborate setups. By the time I got into saltwater tanks, I was deep into reef systems, LED lighting, and automated feeding rigs. My house looks like an aquarium exhibit, and my water bill has doubled. It's mesmerizing to watch, but I've spent more on my fish than I did on my first car, and they don't even care. Story 31. Crochet seemed like the ultimate budget-friendly hobby, just a ball of yarn and a hook. But then I discovered premium yarns, hand-dyed skeins, and limited-edition colorways. I started collecting faster than I could crochet, and now I have totes stuffed with yarn I'll never use. Every project requires a new shade or texture, and somehow I've spent hundreds just to make scarves I could have bought for $10. I'm not sure if I'm crocheting anymore or just hoarding, but either way, I'm out of closet space. Story 32. I thought Lego was for kids until I bought a small set for fun. That opened the floodgates. Suddenly, I was obsessed with collector's editions, massive builds, and custom displays. My shelves are filled with castles, spaceships, and architectural wonders, and I've dropped thousands on sets I barely have time to assemble. The kicker? I bought a Lego set for my kid, but can't let them touch it because it's part of the collection. At this rate, I'll need another house just to store my bricks. Story 33. Gardening felt like a wholesome way to save money and eat fresh. So I dug in, literally. After buying soil, planters, tools, and seeds, I was already in too deep. Then came the pest treatments, new irrigation systems, and compost bins. My yard is a battle zone between me and the weeds, and my first tomato cost me about $100. I keep telling myself next season will be better, but deep down, I know the farmer's market is the smarter choice. Story 34. When I started woodworking, it was just for fun. I figured I'd make a couple of simple projects and call it a day, but every new idea meant new tools, clamps, saws, sanders, you name it. I convinced myself it was an investment because I could sell my work. Problem is, every sale just funds another tool and I can't keep up with demand. My garage looks like a Home Depot, and I'm basically running a side hustle I never asked for. Story 35. Fishing was supposed to be a relaxing escape. I got a cheap rod, some bait, and hit the lake. Then I wanted a better rod, a kayak, and fancy lures. Before I knew it, I had electronic fish finders and tackle boxes filled with gear I barely understand. Meanwhile, kids with toy rods catch fish left and right while I sit there wondering what I'm doing wrong. Fishing taught me patience, all right, patience with my bank account shrinking. Story 36. Running seemed like the cheapest sport. Just grab a pair of shoes and go. Then I discovered specialized shoes for every type of run, high-tech watches that track every step, and premium running clothes that claim to make me faster. I started entering races, which meant travel, entry fees, and hotel stays. Now I have a collection of gear for every weather condition, and my once cheap hobby costs me more than a gym membership. At least the race medals make for cool wall art. Story 37. I got into fountain pens thinking one good pen will last a lifetime. That turned into a collection of pens for every occasion, a rainbow of inks, and fancy notebooks too nice to actually use. I even bought a case to display them, as if they're museum pieces. Writing letters became an excuse to buy more accessories, and now I'm knee-deep in stationery and wondering how I managed to spend thousands on something that was supposed to save me money over disposable pens. Story 38. Snowboarding was my affordable way to enjoy winter. I started with basic gear and some local lift tickets. Then I upgraded my board, bought better boots, and got a season pass. The obsession snowballed into powder day road trips, flights to far-off mountains, and a wardrobe of jackets and goggles for every weather condition. Now I plan my vacations around storms, and my gear takes up more space than my winter clothes. I keep telling myself it's worth it for those perfect runs, but my wallet says otherwise. Story 39. 3D printing hooked me with the idea of creating useful stuff on the cheap. I started with one printer and a spool of filament. Then I needed more colors, better quality filament, and tools for post-processing. Before I knew it, I had multiple printers, shelves of supplies, and a backlog of projects I'd never finish. Most of my prints are knickknacks collecting dust, but I convince myself it's all worth it every time I show off a life-size dragon skull printed in shimmering rainbow filament. Story 40. Fish keeping started as a calming hobby, a single tank with a few guppies. Then I upgraded to a larger tank, added exotic fish, and got into aquascaping. Suddenly, I was knee-deep in filters, CO2 systems, and custom lighting. I even dabbled in saltwater tanks, which brought a whole new level of expense. My electric bill soared, and my living room now resembles an aquarium exhibit. It's beautiful, sure, but I spend more time maintaining the tanks than enjoying them. Story 41. Crochet started as a way to keep my hands busy, but it quickly spiraled. I bought yarn in every color, hooks in every size, and patterns I swore I'd complete. Now I have bins filled with skeins I'll never touch, and the only thing I've finished is a scarf for my cat. Every time I see a new yarn sale, I convince myself I need it for future projects. I've spent so much on this affordable hobby that my yarn stash could double as insulation for the house. Story 42. I thought surfing was about simplicity. Just you, a board, and the ocean. But then I wanted more. Better boards for different wave sizes, wetsuits for every season, and trips to tropical surf spots. My weekends are spent chasing swell forecasts, and I've even adjusted my work schedule around tides. My wife calls it an obsession, but I call it a lifestyle. The worst part? After all the money and time, I'm still chasing that perfect wave from when I was 15. Story 43. I started board gaming as a way to bond with friends. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out deluxe editions, Kickstarter exclusives, and collector's items add up fast. My shelves are overflowing with games we don't even play, and I'm still buying more because I might need them someday. My friends love to tease me about the unopened boxes, but I can't resist when a new game drops with shiny extras. The real game here? How quickly my money disappears. Story 44. Gardening seemed like the ultimate win-win. Save money and grow my own food. But then I needed raised beds, premium soil, fertilizer, and pest control. My backyard became a battle zone against bugs, weeds, and rabbits that ate more of my harvest than I did. The result? A few tomatoes and a cucumber that looked like it came from the clearance bin. I told myself this year would be different, but deep down, I know the only thing growing is my gardening budget. Story 45. When I got into cycling, it was just for fitness. A bike and a helmet were all I needed. But then I wanted clipless pedals, high-performance shoes, and a bike computer to track every ride. I upgraded to a carbon frame, bought matching jerseys, and even planned vacations around cycling routes. My garage looks like a pro shop, and every time I ride, I find another gadget or accessory to improve my performance. My legs are stronger, but my wallet is working overtime just to keep up.